It began on a Sunday evening, the kind of Los Angeles evening that looks deceptively calm from the outside, the sky turning that faint, exhausted shade of orange that never quite makes it to red before sinking into a dull gray blue. I'd driven home from the grocery store just before sunset, the weight of the week still somewhere behind my ribs, pressing but not yet painful. The air inside my apartment was thick with stillness. I left the bags on the counter and leaned against the kitchen sink for a moment, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator and the distant traffic below my window. The city felt quiet in that hour between noise, before nightlife began, after errands had ended. The smell of detergent clung faintly to my hands. My wrists ached from typing. My body was tired in the way that comes from too much giving, not to a person but to everything. Work, expectations, invisible debts no one asked me to repay, but I did anyway. I'd promised to stop by my parents' house that evening. Just dinner, my mother had said, something simple, nothing fancy. That phrase always meant the opposite. By the time I arrived in their neighborhood, the light had thinned into pale ribbons behind the palm trees. The house, that same white stucco two-story I'd partly paid for without ever being acknowledged for it, stood with all its windows glowing, as if to advertise warmth. Inside, the air smelled of rosemary and butter. My mother was at the stove, moving with the efficient tension of someone both hosting and defending her worth. My father sat at the table with his phone propped against a glass, scrolling with small jerks of the wrist, pretending not to care. And my younger brother, Liam, sat across from him, laughing at something on his screen. His laugh, bright, careless, filled the room in a way mine never had permission to. I placed the wine I'd brought on the counter. "Hi," I said softly. My mother turned briefly, smiled with that quick politeness she reserved for neighbors or colleagues. "Oh, you made it. We weren't sure you'd come." I didn't ask why. I knew that tone, the one that turned every arrival into an apology for being late, every presence into proof I'd abandoned them. Dinner was set on the table with practiced symmetry, the polished silverware, the white plates, the folded napkins. My father poured the wine into his glass first, not looking at me. We ate mostly in silence, punctuated by small, shallow observations. Traffic, weather, the neighbor's renovation. It was the kind of talk that fills space but erases connection. I watched the reflection of the chandelier tremble in the wineglass, a distorted constellation of light. Halfway through the meal, my mother cleared her throat, that subtle signal of shifting mood. "Oh, by the way," she said, glancing at my father, "we've been meaning to tell you something." The knife in my hand paused against the plate. "What is it?" "It's about the apartment," my father said, still not looking up. His voice had that businesslike calm he used when discussing things he'd already decided. "We gave Liam permission to use it, temporarily." For a moment, I didn't understand. The apartment, my apartment, the one I'd been paying the mortgage on for 4 years because I thought they were renting it out to help cover their debt. "Use it?" I repeated. My mother smiled faintly, as though I'd overreacted. "He needed a place closer to work. It's just for a while, until he figures things out. You're always so generous." The sentence landed like a quiet blow. The way she framed it, not a question, not even a request. A statement of what I supposedly was. Generous. Always generous. I felt my breath catch, but I didn't say anything. The sound of the clock ticking in the hallway grew louder, sharper. Liam looked up briefly, maybe sensing the shift in my expression, then looked away again. My mother continued as if she were reading from a script. "You weren't using it anyway, sweetheart. It seemed silly to let it sit empty when he's been struggling so much." Struggling, that word in her mouth always meant not succeeding as effortlessly as I had. My fork touched the plate again softly. "Did you ask me?" Silence, the kind that expands until it fills every inch of a room, pressing against walls, lungs, and thought. My father exhaled, put his glass down. "You know how family works. We help each other. Don't make this into a thing. Don't make this into a thing." I'd heard that exact phrase since childhood. Whenever I cried, whenever I protested, whenever I tried to name what hurt. It was the family's motto, disguised as emotional maturity. I stared at the tablecloth, the faint stains near my father's side, the tiny flicker of the candle, the condensation sliding down my glass. all of it too clear, too vivid. "I signed that lease," I said finally. "It's in my name." My mother waved her hand, a little dismissive gesture. "Oh, honey, we'll handle it. You don't need to stress over paperwork. You've always been so busy." And then she smiled again, that serene managerial smile of hers, as if the matter were resolved. Something inside me folded then, quietly, not breaking, not snapping, just bending inward like paper under steam. The rest of dinner went on as though nothing had been said. Liam talked about his job. My father refilled his glass. I chewed food I couldn't taste. When it ended, I helped clear the plates out of habit. My mother thanked me absently, already checking her phone. Outside, the air was cool and dry. I stood in the driveway, keys in my hand, looking up at the faint glow of my apartment in the hills, the one that was no longer mine, apparently. For the first time, I didn't feel anger. Not yet. Just the slow, inevitable sinking of realization that this was never about the apartment. It was about ownership, about who was allowed to claim what they built. I drove home in silence. The city lights passed like ghosts across my windshield, each one flickering for a moment before disappearing behind me. When I got home, I didn't turn on the lights. I stood in the dark for a long time, listening to the hum of the refrigerator again, the faint creak of pipes, the muted heartbeat of the city outside. And then, quietly, I sat down at my desk. I opened the lease folder on my computer. I stared at the numbers, the documents, the signatures, proof of all the invisible scaffolding that had kept them standing while they pretended to build it themselves. My hand didn't shake. My breathing was steady. It wasn't rage that filled me. It was clarity. Cold, luminous, final. And that was how it always began. Not with a scream, but with silence. The next morning began with sunlight that felt too clean. It came in through the blinds in thin, sharp lines, slicing across the kitchen counter, landing on the half-empty mug I'd left there the night before. The air smelled faintly of coffee grounds and something metallic, like the inside of a new coin. I hadn't slept much. The hours had blurred into one long, restless stretch of thought. Not anger exactly, but a kind of quiet cataloging. Every memory that once made sense now seemed to rearrange itself into something sharper, truer. I thought about the day I'd co-signed that apartment. It had been summer, blinding, dry, and loud with construction noise. My parents had been behind on their mortgage again. I'd offered to buy the small unit downtown, rent it out, help stabilize their credit. It felt adult at the time, mature. I remember the pride in my mother's voice when she told her friends that we're investing in property now. I used to think that word meant belonging. Now I understood it meant ownership, not of things but of me. The kettle began to whistle. I turned off the stove, poured water over the coffee grounds, and watched the steam rise in slow curling ribbons. That smell, burnt, rich grounding, was the only thing that tethered me to the morning. When my phone vibrated on the counter, I knew who it would be before I looked. My mother's messages always came early, small digital intrusions dressed as concern. "Morning, sweetheart. Hope you got home safely. Don't overthink about yesterday. Family helps family, remember?" The phrasing was almost gentle, but the weight beneath it was not. I stared at the screen for a long time before setting it face down on the table. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened my laptop and logged into my online accounts, the mortgage portal, the email threads, the insurance documents. Each tab felt like pulling back another layer of something rotten I'd been too polite to name. And then I found it. 2 weeks ago, a new automatic transfer had been added to my bank account. The same account tied to the apartment payments. The memo line read simply, "Family support." The amount wasn't small. It had been coming out monthly, quietly, while I'd been paying the rest of the bills. They hadn't even asked. They just decided. I sat there motionless for what felt like an hour. Outside, a siren wailed and faded. Somewhere below, a dog barked and stopped. It was almost comical, the precision of their manipulation. They never shouted, never demanded outright. They simply redefined generosity until it resembled obligation. By mid-afternoon, I found myself driving without purpose. Through downtown, past the coffee shops with their sweating windows, past the rows of jacaranda trees, shedding purple petals, like confetti on cracked sidewalks. I parked near the building that housed my apartment. It was strange seeing it from the outside after months of letting it fade from memory. The glass facade caught the sun like a blade. I could see the faint reflection of myself in the entrance door, tired, composed, almost ghost-like. At the front desk, the concierge smiled politely. "Hi, Miss Keller. Haven't seen you in a while. Is your brother moving in permanently?" That word, permanently, lodged in my chest like a seed of panic. I smiled back too softly. "I'm not sure yet," I said. But I was sure. I just couldn't say it out loud. Not here, not yet. I went up to the 10th floor. The hallway smelled of air freshener and new carpet. That sterile kind of clean that never feels lived in. I stopped outside the door. My door. The lock had been changed. That was the moment the anger came. Quiet, physical, not hot but heavy. It filled my throat, my hands, my lungs. Not because of the key, but because it confirmed what I'd always known but never wanted to believe. That they'd already decided I didn't need to be asked. I leaned against the wall for a long time, breathing slowly. Down the hall, a young couple walked past, laughing about something small and beautiful. Their voices trailed behind them, warm, careless. For a moment, I felt like a ghost, haunting the edges of someone else's life. When I got back to my car, the sky had started to turn, streaks of pale gold bleeding into blue-gray. I sat there with the engine off, listening to the muffled hum of traffic. It wasn't just about the apartment anymore. It was about a lifetime of quiet taking. Every favor, every thank you. Every time I'd been told I was strong enough not to need anything in return. And still, I didn't cry, I didn't call. Instead, I went home and opened a blank document on my laptop. I typed the first line of what would eventually become a letter. Not to them, but to myself. You are not cruel for choosing peace over chaos. You are not selfish for wanting your own name on your own door. The cursor blinked. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator again. The same sound that had started everything. Outside, the city flickered alive. Somewhere in the distance, laughter echoed, the kind that sounds easy when you've never had to earn it. I closed my laptop, and for the first time in years, I allowed the silence to stay. By the next week, I had learned to move through my days as if nothing had changed. I went to work, answered emails, laughed at things that weren't funny. The performance of normalcy was second nature. I'd been rehearsing it my whole life. But beneath the surface, everything was shifting. My eyes began to see details they used to skip over. The way my mother's texts always started with affection and ended in subtle obligation. How my brother's tone softened only when he needed something. How I'd been trained to interpret silence as safety. That weekend, I drove to my parents' house in the valley. The air there always felt thicker, too still, too sweet with jasmine. The neighborhood had that peculiar stillness of places where nothing new happens. Lawns perfectly trimmed, cars washed, facades unchanging. Inside, the air was cold from the AC. My mother was in the kitchen, slicing fruit with her usual efficiency, controlled, graceful, precise. My father sat at the dining table, reading the financial section of a paper he probably didn't understand, humming faintly through his nose. The smell of overripe peaches and detergent filled the room. "Morning," my mother said without looking up. "Coffee's fresh." I poured myself a cup and sat opposite my father. He nodded once, eyes never leaving the paper. The quiet was so familiar, it felt staged. Then, casually, she said it. "Oh, by the way, we had to handle the apartment paperwork. Your brother's name is on the lease now, too. Easier that way." The sound of the spoon clinking against my cup seemed unnaturally loud. "Isa," I repeated. She nodded as if she were discussing groceries. "Yes, you're so busy, sweetheart. And it's not fair that you handle all that alone. We just thought it made sense." That was the word she always used before doing something irreversible. It made sense. I stared at the counter, at the neat rows of oranges in a white bowl, at the glint of the knife's edge under the overhead light. I wanted to ask when, exactly, they had decided my independence was negotiable. But the truth was, I already knew. "Does he live there now?" I asked. She hesitated. It was a small, fleeting pause, but enough to tell me everything. "Just temporarily," she said. "He needs a place to stay until he gets back on his feet. You understand?" I understood perfectly. He'd never been on his feet. He floated, cushioned by the quiet labor of everyone around him, and I had been his most reliable cushion. The conversation shifted to something meaningless. My job, her garden, the weather. The kind of filler that disguises rot. I excused myself early. As I walked to the car, I saw my brother's old Mustang parked in the driveway. He'd always loved that car, more for what it symbolized than what it was. Freedom, movement, escape. It occurred to me then that the apartment might be that for him now, another symbol of independence he hadn't earned. The drive home blurred. The freeway lights streaked across the windshield like veins of light. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on the couch with the city breathing faintly outside my window and scrolled through years of text messages, receipts, email threads, the digital evidence of a lifetime of small betrayals disguised as gratitude. The next morning, I made coffee, opened my laptop, and began a quiet kind of work. Not revenge, not yet, but preparation. I reviewed every legal document tied to the apartment. I called the bank. I checked property records. Slowly, methodically, I began to extract the threads they'd wrapped around me. When I found out that the utilities were still in my name, I didn't feel anger, just clarity. I changed the passwords, removed my card from the automatic billing system, and scheduled termination notices for the end of the month. It was all painfully simple. Each click of the mouse felt like reclaiming a fragment of myself. Later, I stood by the window and watched the sun crawl up the glass of the opposite building. A slow, deliberate burn. For years, I'd thought strength meant endurance. That being the one who stayed, who helped, who forgave, that it was noble. But maybe it had only made me easier to use. The phone rang around noon. My brother. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. Hey, he said, casual, like nothing had happened. Mom said the Wi-Fi's down in the apartment. You know anything about that? I felt something sharp bloom in my chest. Not satisfaction, but something quieter. Control, maybe. I do, I said evenly. I had it disconnected. It's still my account. A pause, then a scoff, defensive, boyish. You serious? You can't just... I can, I interrupted. My voice surprised me. Calm, unflinching. And I did. He exhaled loudly. You're overreacting. It's family, Layla. Why are you making everything so... I hung up. The silence that followed was exquisite. That night, I cooked for myself. Something simple and precise. Roasted vegetables, lemon, rosemary. The smell filled the apartment like a quiet declaration. This space is mine. No one called again that evening. And for the first time, the quiet didn't feel lonely. It felt earned. 3 days passed before my mother called. Her voice had that brittle lightness that always came before something unpleasant. Hi, sweetheart, she began, stretching the word until it lost meaning. Your brother says the apartment's utilities aren't working. Did you forget to pay? Forget. That word again. The one they used when they needed me to play dumb. To make their choices easier. I didn't forget, I said. I closed the accounts. They were under my name. Silence hummed on the other end. I could almost hear her recalibrating. The quick mental math of how to sound reasonable while regaining control. Well, that's inconvenient, she said finally, the sweetness already thinning. You could have warned us. He's staying there for work, you know. It's temporary. It's been 6 months, I said. Her sigh came slow, deliberate. You're always so precise, Leela. It's not healthy keeping track of everything. I smiled faintly. I used to think so too. The call ended before she could reassert her moral authority. I knew what would come next. A flurry of group texts, maybe a dramatic message from my father about family loyalty. The choreography was predictable. I made a pot of coffee and opened my laptop again. The bank accounts were linked, a subtle thing I'd overlooked before. Transfers here and there, small withdrawals labeled miscellaneous. Enough to go unnoticed unless you looked. I looked. I printed every record, each line an echo of a pattern I'd lived for years. Quiet exploitation dressed up as affection. It didn't even hurt anymore. It was arithmetic. That weekend, I drove back to the valley, not to confront, but to observe. The air shimmered in that early summer way, the heat bending light on the road. Their house stood still and proud as ever, its lawn aggressively trimmed, its door painted a sterile shade of blue. My mother opened it, smile perfectly placed, voice overly bright. Leela, what a surprise! Inside, the TV hummed low, the smell of roast chicken hanging thick in the air. My brother appeared from the hallway, barefoot, wearing my old college sweatshirt. He looked at me like I was the one trespassing. I sat at the table. My mother poured me tea. My father adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. "So," he began, "about the apartment. Of course, not how are you, not you look tired, just business disguised as family talk." "I've handled it," I said. "The lease will be in my name only from next month. I've already filed the notice." My mother's hand froze mid-air, a delicate tremor rippling through her fingers. "That's unnecessary," she said. "It's always been our family's place. We all contributed." "No," I said quietly. "I did." My brother scoffed. "Come on, Lila. You think a couple checks make it yours? We all helped." The absurdity of it almost made me laugh. He hadn't worked a steady job in 3 years. My parents had kept him afloat with my money, disguised as helping with rent or temporary support. "I'm not here to argue," I said. "I just came to let you know." My father's voice hardened. "You're being selfish." There it was, the old refrain, their sharpest weapon, selfish, the word that kept me obedient for decades. I looked at him, really looked, the rigid posture, the thinning hair, the faint yellow tint of fatigue around his eyes. For the first time, I saw not power, but decay. A man who had built his authority on guilt and silence. "Maybe," I said, "but at least it's finally honest." Something cracked in my brother's face then. A flicker of disbelief, maybe fear. He started to speak, but I stood up before he could. I left my keys on the counter. "That's the spare," I said. "You won't need it anymore." The air outside felt sharp and alive. The heat pressed against my skin like light through glass. That night, I slept soundly for the first time in months. The city's noise became a lullaby. Distant sirens, laughter in the street, a hum of life that asked nothing of me. Over the next few weeks, I dismantled every thread they tied to me. I changed banks, closed joint accounts, rerouted mail, moved valuables out of the apartment. Each task was small but sacred, a quiet rebellion written in paperwork. One afternoon, I stood in the empty apartment, sunlight filtering through sheer curtains. The walls looked different without the clutter, pale, clean, full of air. I didn't feel sad, only steady. The silence wasn't punishment anymore. It was proof. When I locked the door for the last time, I didn't look back. I knew they wouldn't stay silent for long. People like my family don't crumble quietly. They clatter, they echo. They make sure their collapse sounds like your fault. It began with small things. A text from my mother. "We're worried about you. This isn't like you." A voicemail from my father. "You've misunderstood. We're still family after all." Then came the message that made me pause. A legal notice from their attorney, claiming I'd misappropriated property that belonged to the family trust. Trust. The irony almost made me laugh. I didn't panic. I gathered the papers, organized them neatly on my kitchen table. Bank statements, proof of payments, every receipt from the past 5 years. My life reduced to data, but finally, it spoke my language. Precision, evidence, fact. The apartment was quieter now. I had stopped playing music. I preferred the hum of the refrigerator, the rhythmic ticking of the clock on the wall. Time itself seemed on my side now. Deliberate, steady, unhurried. I called their lawyer. We met in a sterile conference room downtown, all glass and chrome. He was polite but uncertain, his voice carrying the forced confidence of someone realizing he'd been hired for a losing battle. When I handed him the folder, he flipped through it slowly, brow tightening. "This is extensive," he said. "Yes," I replied. "It's also honest." 2 days later, I received an email. Brief, impersonal. The claim was withdrawn. No apology, no explanation. Just silence where the noise used to be. But silence doesn't stay empty for long. It echoes. That weekend, my brother showed up at my apartment unannounced. He buzzed until I opened the door. He looked thinner, or maybe just deflated. His bravado had shrunk into something small and fidgeting. "Why are you doing this?" he asked, stepping inside without waiting for an answer. "I'm not doing anything," I said. "I stopped." He laughed, dry and bitter. "You think this makes you free? You think cutting us off means you win?" "No," I said. "It just means I stopped losing." He stared at me for a long time. "You changed," he finally muttered. "You used to care." I met his gaze. "I still do," I said, "just not in the way that hurts me." For a moment, I thought he might cry. Instead, he looked around my apartment. Bare walls, open space, sunlight falling on clean wood floors. He shook his head. "You always wanted control. You finally got it." He left the door open behind him. The hallway air drifted in, warm and dust-scented, filled with the faint echo of other lives. Laughter, footsteps, someone's TV playing a game show. I closed the door. The sound of the latch clicking felt like punctuation. Final, quiet, absolute. After that, everything slowed down. My parents stopped calling. Friends who once mediated between us quietly drifted away, uncertain of whose version to believe. But I didn't need belief anymore. I had peace. I began rebuilding in small, almost invisible ways. I bought fresh linens, painted the kitchen walls in soft gray, started cooking again. Real meals, not the half-hearted dinners I used to make when I was too tired from fixing everyone else's problems. One night, I hosted a dinner, my first in years. Just 3 people, co-workers, not family. The table was modest, but there was laughter, real, unguarded laughter. Someone spilled wine, and no one apologized for it. It felt like breathing after years underwater. After they left, I washed the dishes slowly, one by one. The scent of garlic and rosemary lingered in the air. The window was open, and the night outside hummed with the distant sound of the freeway. Constant, indifferent, alive. I sat by the open window and looked at the city. Lights flickered across rooftops like quiet constellations. I thought about my family, not with anger, not even sadness, but with a strange tenderness for what I'd finally outgrown. They were still out there, somewhere, rehearsing their stories, convincing each other that I'd betrayed them. Maybe they even believed it. Maybe they needed to. But I no longer did. The truth didn't need defending. It just needed living. Months passed. I got a promotion. Moved to a new apartment closer to the studio. Different view, same city, but it felt lighter now, as if the air itself had forgiven me for breathing my own way. Sometimes I imagine running into them, at a store, a restaurant, maybe a wedding. I wonder what I'd say. Maybe nothing. Maybe something simple like, I hope you're well. Because by then, I really would mean it. And yet, a quiet question lingers in me, one that I never try to answer. What would you do when those who once called you family want back into your life, after you finally learned to live without them? A year later, the city felt different. Or maybe I finally did. The air in Los Angeles had the same dry sweetness, the faint smell of asphalt and orange blossom, but it didn't cling to me the way it used to. I walked slower now, looked up more often, let the light land where it wanted. My new apartment sat on the top floor of an old building in Silver Lake. The windows were tall, the kind that opened inward, and in the afternoons the entire room turned gold. Dust floated like lazy confetti. Sometimes I'd watch it for so long that time seemed to stretch, soft, malleable, kind. There were plants now, real ones, not the brittle IKEA ones I used to forget to water. A jade, a snake plant, a lemon tree that stubbornly refused to fruit, but looked beautiful anyway. They grew quietly, without expectation. It felt like companionship. Work had shifted too. I'd left my corporate job and started freelancing full-time. It was less stable, but it felt honest, like breathing in rhythm with myself for the first time. My days were a balance of silence and motion. Coffee, design drafts, phone calls, walks, light. Sometimes I'd hear from people who used to orbit my family. They'd mention updates, a surgery, a graduation, a move. Their words always ended the same way. You should call them. It's been long enough. I never argued. I just smiled and changed the subject. But one morning, a letter arrived. No return address, just my name written in my mother's hand. Neat, careful, trying too hard to seem calm. I left it on the kitchen counter for 2 days before opening it. When I finally did, the paper smelled faintly of lavender, her perfume always too sweet. The letter wasn't long. She wrote that they missed me, that the house felt empty, that my brother had been doing better. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of what had happened, just the soft manipulation of nostalgia. We were always close, remember? You were always our strong one. I folded the letter back into the envelope and placed it in the drawer, where I kept old warranties and tax forms. It didn't deserve the intimacy of fire or the drama of a tear. It deserved to be filed, factual, finished, over. That evening, I sat on the balcony with a cup of tea. Below me, the city hummed, buses groaning down Sunset, laughter from a nearby rooftop, the metallic hiss of sprinklers on pavement. It was all so ordinary, and that's what made it perfect. I thought about the years I'd spent trying to make myself small enough to fit inside other people's comfort. How I'd mistaken endurance for love. How I'd called exhaustion loyalty. The quiet had taught me otherwise. Healing, I realize, isn't loud. It's not the grand speech or the dramatic ending. It's small, almost invisible. Remembering to buy flowers for yourself, letting the phone go unanswered, closing the door gently instead of slamming it. When people talk about forgiveness, they usually mean reconciliation. But I think forgiveness is simpler. It's the act of no longer needing revenge, of finally choosing to be free instead of right. The sky shifted into dusk, soft pink fading into pale indigo. A car alarm went off somewhere far away, sharp and fleeting. Then silence again. I breathed in the warm air, felt the weight of quiet things, the cup in my hand, the heartbeat in my chest, the life I'd built from the rubble of expectation. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was missing anything. Just before going inside, I looked toward the horizon, the faint outline of the ocean beyond the city haze, shimmering like a promise. Somewhere out there they still existed, my family, my past. But they no longer owned me. I whispered it softly to the night, to myself, to no one. I'm free. Then I turned off the balcony light, closed the door behind me, and let the dark feel like home.